Hey guys, today I'd like to talk about my concerns for the future of loot in Destiny 2. Specifically, we're going to talk about the loot tier system in Armor 3.0. Let's start with loot tiers. Currently in the game we have two tiers of loot, normal drops and adept or artifice drops. The main difference between normal and adept loot is that adepts come with extra perks, thus you can get your desired weapons faster if you quickly run high level activities. With the Edge of Fate, Bungie aims to change this system by replacing regular and adept loot by tiers ranging from 1 to 5. With each tier of the weapon, the more perks you have, and additionally you get enhanced everything: barrels, magazines, perks, and origin traits. This is a massive change that aims to create gameplay separation between tier 1s and tier 5s. Currently, getting regular loot doesn't restrict you from enhancing traits. Adepts only gets access to special adept mods, which became worthless with the addition of new weapon mods and recently. I'm worried how this will change the farming aspect in Destiny. First of all, why would anyone farm anything but tier 5 drops? Sure, while leveling, players will gradually start from tier 1 loot and work up their way to tier 2, 3, 4, and all the way up to 5. But once they reach tier 5 loot, why would they look back at those lower tiers? This is an issue that is present and solved in Warframe. Warframe's leveling experience works very similarly to what I've just described. You start on low level planets and work your way up to tier 5 loot. Warframe has a system called Mastery Rank. You progress through ranks by leveling up weapons to the max. What is important, however, is that a tier 1 item grants the same amount of mastery rank as a tier 5 item. This means that all gear remains valuable to earn, as you'll need it to rank up. However, there are also systems in place which allow you to increase tiers of weapons in Warframe. You have two main systems: weapon variants and incarnates. Weapon variants aim to bring tier 1 weapons into tier 3 and 4 categories. This would be similar to starting from your white kebab staff and doing a quest or using currency to turn the weapon into a legendary variant with better stats and higher damage. The second system, Incarnates, turns weapons from their regular tier 2, 3, all the way up to tier 5. These power jumps are most comparable to the Husk of the Pit turning into Necrochasm, and the Perkless Rose turning into Lumina. I don't think that either system would fit into Destiny, but it proposes an interesting solution: weapon upgradability. What if you could take a tier 4 weapon and 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 at a price of one exotic cipher as well as 100 spoils of conquest, you could level up that weapon to tier 5, granting you enhanced traits, skins, but not extra perks. Your tier 4 weapon would still have 2 perks per column, but if that already was a god roll, you wouldn't have to worry about getting the tier 5 version of that weapon. This would solve the issue of players feeling forced to play Grandmaster level activities by allowing them to progress towards that 5 out of 5 slammer with the ability to later upgrade it. Highest level activities would still be worth farming, as you'd be skipping the upgrade process to tier 5 entirely. I also worry that having 5 tiers of loot is too much for Destiny. Nowadays, if you look in the Vanguard activities, you have players who play Strikes and those who play Grandmasters. Despite several difficulty options, Nightfalls only see players in the hardest versions, due to amount of loot. Early previews of the portal showed that Bungie aims at 4 difficulty levels for the game: easy, normal, hard, and Grandmaster. What is the reason to run anything besides Grandmaster difficulty activities if you want the most as well as the best loot? With that, we're moving on to Armor 3.0. Currently, in the game, we can only control which stats we want to see with at least 10 points. This leaves the remaining potential 47 points up to the RNG. What is important to mention is that the stat distribution works in a way where half of your stats will be assigned to your passive stats, mobility, resilience, and recovery, while the second half will be assigned to ability stats, discipline, intellect, and strength. Edge of Fate tackles this problem by introducing stat splits based on the armor's archetype. Each archetype will consist of a main stat, a secondary stat, and a third random stat. Think about it this way. If you want armor with high health and melee, you might be interested in the Moon's armor set. This gives players way more control regarding the stat distribution, as you can easily see which piece results in what drops. However, this worries me, because what if you have an armor perk which you'd like to use in a melee build, but that perk is tied to armor which has stat spikes in weapons and class? How much of the melee stat would you be able to acquire just from that third randomly assigned stat spike, and can control that spike similarly to how nowadays we can control 10 stat points with the use of a ghost mod? Speaking of stats, Bungie reworked stats in order to remove those always required stats like resilience and recovery. These new stats grant cooldowns and quality of life effects in ranges between 0 to 100, but they also grant significant effects in ranges 100 to 1 to 200. This worries me, as certain stats, such as weapons and super, directly increase your damage output, which seems to be the meta for PvE at this very moment. Something that wasn't described is how getting extra super damage would influence abilities like Wall of Radiance or Shadow Shot. Those abilities aren't made for damage, therefore investing anything above 100 seems like a waste. But maybe Bungie will grant you, for example, a stronger Radiant buff or a stronger Weaken effect at 200. I would hate to see that, as it would force players into heavy investment. What about abilities like Duskfield, Shackle, or Healing Grenade? These abilities don't deal damage, so how would they benefit from heavy investment? Would they have a longer duration or a stronger effect? We don't know these things yet. In terms of PvP, it seems like health is just the new recovery, and weapons is what resilience did before, so congrats to Bungie for making those stats for PvP. I'm a big fan of armor tiers, as they introduce a lot more clarity on armor drops, as well as hopefully mean that every armor piece will be eligible to reach those end game stat amounts. Stat totals are a massive problem in the game currently, as there is not enough widespread information in the game about what is considered a high stat armor piece. Additionally, systems that exist to improve the armor grind, Artifice Armor and Ghost mods, barely help. Artifice Armor doesn't come with any guaranteed stat splits, so you can still get plus 20 mobility armor. Artifice shares the same loophole as weapons. You can still get armor which is barely 60 stat total, and they only come from master activities. Hearing that we can potentially focus guaranteed 72 stat armor with spikes in health and class just seems like a massive quality of life update that I wish was live in the game already. I'm curious about how hard is it to grind up armor. Let's say that we want to make an armor set for the new Titan Melee exotic. We want 200 melee with as close to 200 health as possible. We have some armor from strikes grinded up, so we're going to use a chest piece and a class item for that Vanguard armor perk we want. Now, we want a second perk from Kepler. How difficult is it to go to the new destination, focus form a helmet and legs with each having a spike in melee. This is something we don't know yet, but this detail would be massive for the armor grind. Lastly, I really hope that Bungie updates all of the previous armor at a reasonable pace, because it's been over 3 years and 4 months since Witch Queen, and we still have loot without origin traits from the Moon, Europa, and Grasp of Avarice. Overall, I'm a fan of the armor changes, while still worried how the tier system will impact mainly the weapons grind.